in this video we're just going to cover some of the modifications that I've made to the bike to cover the low speed idling problem that seems to be endemic with these ZSB 125 fuel injection bikes. I think what I'll do is I'll just set the scene a little bit, explain what the issue is, because there's a few flavours of this issue, and this isn't a one fix all type thing. So let's just have a little talk about what the actual common issue is with these. Right, so first of all, the earlier bikes with the carbs are nowhere near as prone to this problem as the fuel injection bikes. In fact, the newer the bike, the worse it seems to be. So the older the bike, the less prone they are to this issue. So the older carb bikes don't seem to suffer with it, though they are a little bit, can do it sometimes. The first generation of the fuel injected bikes, the E4s, like this one is, that's 2019, are a bit prone to it. It also can ride around the problem, but it's not nice. The later bikes, 2020, are just a nightmare, to be honest. The E5 bikes, Euro 5 bikes, it's just horrendous. Just a bit of an accompaniment there. Right, and what is the actual problem? Okay, so the problem is that the bike starts well from cold. It's no problem at all. It starts well, but 400 yards into riding, 30 seconds later, 60 seconds later, it wants to stall. It won't idle. It idles poorly, and that can even be once the engine's warm. You stop for a cup of tea, you come back to the bike 10 minutes later, it starts fine, but 30 seconds later it's idling really badly. It's a real nuisance now. It's not so bad if you're just in town, you can catch it, but if you've got like a downhill section, you're out in the countryside, the bike can just completely stall and just refuse to start again. It's absolute pain in the neck, really. So you know, this has been going on. It's all the bikes. Why Lexmoto have not sorted it, why Lexmoto dealers continue to sell bikes like this, I've no idea. It's virtually every single person who buys one of the new bikes. In the summer it's not so bad, it still does it, but it's still pretty bad. I've had enough of it. It makes the bike horrible to ride, and it's dangerous. So I see people just revving the nuts off them at the lights, trying to stop them stalling. It's not the answer. But before we go into the fix and what I've done, let's just make sure that you cover everything else. Now, because they're just commuter bikes, people don't tend to look after them, and they tend to have a lot of issues before you'd even start. So the first thing I would check is are the valve clearances good? Okay. Now, this is another bone of contention with me and Lexmoto. The valve clearances that are listed in the handbook, there's no manual, listed in the handbook of 0.01 millimeters is just ridiculous. That's just a completely unfeasible measurement. Not only does it sound wrong, you know, it sounds out by a magnitude of 10, funnily enough, but how can you measure that? How can you measure 0.01? There's no feeler gauge that can measure that distance, so it's just not right. So I would guess, you know, and I've brought this up with dealers, and they go, no, that's the correct one. I said, well, how do you measure it then? And they don't really have an answer to that. But I would set the valve clearances to a much more sensible 0.1 of a millimetre. Now you can set inlet and exhaust to both them, or you can set your exhaust slightly bigger at 0.15. Now that's what I always set the bike. So I always do inlet 0.1, exhaust 0.15. Now they're typical sort of 1980s tap hit small bike, GS125, CB125 sorts of clearances, and that's what I stick to, right? I know my exhaust valve's clearing, and that tight exhaust valve can cause that problem. Absolutely 100%. The tight exhaust valve can cause poor running at low speed. Okay, and poor starting. That's the giveaway, it's poor starting as well. Okay, right. The second issue that afflicts these bikes, because they run so cold and they run so weak, and they're used for short journeys in very bad weather, is the breathers block up. Now I've done a video on that, I'll link it somewhere. This is the engine breather here. It goes into the air filter, and this completely clogs up. Now the bike's not going to run properly if it can't breathe properly, especially at low speed. It's going to have a problem, and it's going to affect your top speed as well. So I've done a video on clearing out the breather. You can do that as well. The third issue for these EFI bikes is that they've got an emission control, and you can see the filter there. That needs to be clear, and the tank needs to be able to breathe properly. There's no vent on the cap. It's all done through this filter, and to be honest, it clogs with fuel, blocks up with petrol, gets stuck in there, and it can't breathe, and that can cause running problems as well. you need to make sure that all them 3 issues are completely sorted before you go any further with this. Okay, so on to the fix then. Assuming that all them issues are good, you've got a good throttle cable on, there's good fuel in it, the fuel's not 6 months old, the fuel tank can also get a bit rusty inside, people don't look after them properly and leave them for long periods. I'm assuming that all the fuel's good, and the bike still has this idling problem when it's low speed. Let's go into what I've done to resolve it. Okay, so I basically think there's 2 issues here. One is, well, it's all to do with the same issue really, and it's all to do with emissions, modern emissions, which is why the more modern bikes are afflicted, especially the E5 bikes. You basically got a 1980s engine design, trying to make it work 40 years later. Well, no wonder you got a problem. You've got EFI jammed on, you've got fuel injection jammed onto it. Now, I've ridden a few bikes that were started off as carburetors and gone to EFI, and I'm never convinced that they run better with the fuel injection on them. I think when an engine's designed to do fuel injection from the beginning, they tend to be better, but ones that are converted to fuel injection later on, it's very rare that you find one that actually runs better than the actual carbs, and is easier to manage as well. Anyway, we digress a bit. So the 2 issues, and there's 2, is the engine runs too slow and it runs too weak. And when I say it runs too weak, it means there's too much air compared to fuel, so there's not enough fuel in it in the mixture, and in carburation it's just too unstable, and it really has the feel of that unstable carburation. You go touching the throttle, the engine wants to stall, it gets the fuel injection into a bit of a twist, it can get really confused, and it will not start. In which case the best thing to do is to turn everything off, leave it, go away, come back in 5 minutes before you flatten the battery, and then try it again. But there's basically 2 issues. Okay, so what we do is, part 1 is we're going to turn this screw here. So on the side of here we've got a little idle mixture control screw, and I would turn that from the base setting, assuming you've got the base setting, is half a turn out. So that's anti-clockwise, 1/2 turn out. Okay, that's fix number 1. And fix number 2, okay, is we need to speed that idle up. Now, ideally, I would think that an engine like this wants to idle at about a minimum of about 750 RPM. Now, these bikes have got a balance shaft, and they will idle really, really low, really steadily, and they will idle at about 400 RPM. It's far too slow, and I think what they've done is they've used that to get a good emissions count by setting the idle very, very low, and it's far too low. Most bikes idle at about 500 RPM. I would feel to bring that up about 750, and that just feels like combustion's a lot more stable at that revs, and it's just a lot less likely to stall. Okay, there is no adjustment on this, but it is a bit of a nightmare really to get at. So let me just see if I can get the camera in here. Okay, so part 2 of the fix is to raise that tick over just a small degree. So you can see here it's actually fairly clear. Hopefully the camera is focusing on that you can see. Let me just rotate the throttle a bit so you can see actually how it works. Okay, so there's the throttle, and that's the throttle closed position, and there's the throttle opening, and you can see what I've done is I've wound 2 M5 nuts on, so that's 8mm outside diameter nuts onto the stop, the throttle stop. Now that throttle stop, I couldn't see any way to adjust it. Now it may be adjustable, but I think you probably need to take the whole bike apart trying to get to it. So all I've done is I've put 2 nuts on, and the second nut overhangs the end of the stop just to give that extra tiny little bit of distance on the stop, and that is enough to raise the tick over up. So I then lock the nuts together, and I've got my tick over up at 750. So the best way to do this, right, is to first wind the first nut on right to the end of the stop, then get the second nut and wind it on so that it's just overhanging the end of the stop about 0.5 millimeter. That's all it needs. Okay, and then start the engine, run it. The engine must be warm and at tick over condition, so it's at full running condition on the fuel, right? And then just with your finger, just turn that nut until it's at 750, right? When you've got it right, stop the engine, put your needle nose pliers onto the end of that nut, and then with your tiny little 8mm spanner, just tweak the nuts up and tight, right? And that should be your tick over set to 750 RPM, and it should just stay at that all the time. So give the bike a test, leave it for 5 minutes, start it up, run it, just make sure that that throttle is returning back to 750, and that you've got sufficient free play here in the throttle. If you've lost all your free play here, you must have your free play here. That's important. You must have this free play in the throttle. If you don't have that free play in the throttle, then you need to just adjust the throttle just here, or you can adjust it down at this end here. You can see the nut there. So if you're not happy with doing this, and I would always stress that, you know, everything's at your own risk. You don't want to touch it. Now, it could be dangerous that you mess with the throttle and you make a mess of it, and the throttle doesn't return. It's vitally important you know what you're doing. It's vitally important you test the bike before you go riding it on the road. And they're my warnings, and that's my disclaimer. So that's the fix, really. There's nothing else more to say, really. That's worked for us. We've had the bike now. I've had that modification on the bike for, well, since the start of December. So it's ran all the way through December, all the way through January, and according to the owner, it's not stalled once. So hopefully that is a proper fix. Oh, and by the way, that is on E10 petrol, not on E5 petrol. So that's on the cheap petrol as well, and it seems to run just happily on that. It's very happy on it. So there you go. Let me know, put a comment in. I'd be interested to know if that fix works for other people, or if you have any improvements or any comments, just leave a comment. Thank you.